Imagine standing in 50 pounds of chainmail armor, watching 25,000 Seljuk Turkish mounted archers, capable of loosing approximately 100,000 arrows per minute, collectively begin circling your position like wolves around wounded prey, knowing that every European cavalry charge you attempt will hit nothing but air, as nimble step ponies stay just beyond lance range, while Parthian shots rain down from riders firing backward at full gallop. July 1. 1,097 Bohemond of Taranto's vanguard of approximately 8,000 to 10,000 First Crusaders knights, infantry. Camp followers, including women and children, was ambushed in the Anatolian highlands by Seljuk Sultan Kilij Arslan I, who had assembled the largest concentration of mounted archers since Attila the Hun to punish the invaders who had captured Nicaea. Here's what makes Dorylaeum tactically nightmarish. The Crusaders had arrogantly split their forces after taking Nicaea. Bohemond marched ahead with the vanguard, while Godfrey of Bouillon's main army lagged miles behind. Godfrey when Kilij Arslan's forces attacked at dawn with deafening kettle drum signals. European heavy cavalry doctrine became completely useless because Turkish composite bow archers on fast ponies simply wheeled away from charging knights, then fired backward using the ancient Parthian shot technique. For 7 hours under blazing July sun reaching 30+ degrees Celsius, Bohemond made the heretical decision to abandon offensive action entirely and form a defensive hedgehog. Dismounted knights creating shield walls, while the perimeter shrank to the Thimbres River under sustained arrow bombardment that killed virtually every horse. Camp women documented in the Gesta Francorum Chronicle brought water to dehydrated fighters under fire in acts of supreme heroism. At approximately 2:00 p.m., when Kilij Arslan prepared final assault, Godfrey's relief army appeared on surrounding ridges, executing accidental pincer movement, while Bishop Adamar of Lepui attacked the Turkish camp from rear. Result: Seljuk army shattered in panic. Approximately 4,000 Christian casualties versus catastrophic Turkish losses. Road to Antioch opened, but Crusade left without cavalry mounts. To understand why the Battle of Dorylaeum became one of the First Crusade's most desperate moments, and why 8,000 Crusaders nearly died in a single morning, you need to understand the fatal arrogance that led them into the trap after their recent victory at Nicaea. Weeks earlier, in June 1097, the Crusaders had captured Nicaea, the Seljuk capital, through siege warfare with Byzantine naval support. The city's surrender felt like vindication of their holy mission. The Crusaders believed the war was essentially over. That Sultan Kilij Arslan, I was fleeing east in defeat. That the road to Jerusalem lay open before them. They were catastrophically wrong. Kilij Arslan wasn't running, he was hunting. Systematically assembling steppe tribes across Anatolia with a single unifying promise: death to the Frankish invaders. While the Crusaders celebrated their victory and argued over spoils, the Sultan built an army of speed and vengeance, drawing from the ancient traditions of mounted archery warfare that had destroyed Roman legions 1,000 years earlier, blind with confidence and eager to advance. The Crusader leadership made the ultimate tactical error. They split their forces for faster movement. Bohemond of Taranto, the ambitious Norman prince whose tactical brilliance was matched only by his reckless aggression, took the vanguard of approximately 8,000 to 10,000 souls, the exact number debated by thousand-day historians, and marched ahead into the Anatolian highlands. Behind him, miles distant, followed the main army under Godfrey of Bouillon with the heavy infantry and remaining cavalry. The gap between the two forces was intentional, meant to allow flexibility and speed, but it created a catastrophic vulnerability. Bohemond was marching his vanguard straight into a kill zone, perfectly designed to exploit every weakness of European military doctrine. At dawn on July 1, Ling Zhou, the trap snapped shut with terrifying suddenness. No warning beyond the deafening roar of kettle drums echoing off the surrounding hills like thunder. Then the skyline disappeared, replaced by thousands upon thousands of mounted archers materializing on every ridge surrounding the valley. They poured down the slopes like an unstoppable landslide of horseflesh and arrows. The Crusaders didn't even have time to form proper defensive lines before the first devastating volley struck and the screaming began. The trap was geometrically perfect. The vanguard was isolated from relief, surrounded on all sides, and dying under an arrow storm that would continue for 7 hours. The natural aggressive instinct of a European knight when facing an enemy was to charge forward with overwhelming force. It was what they were bred for since childhood, what their entire military doctrine and social identity was built upon. You combined 1,000 pounds of armored warhorse and rider, pointed a 12-foot ash lance forward, and smashed into enemy formations like a human battering ram. Physics and momentum did the rest. In Western Europe, fighting against other heavy cavalry or static infantry formations, this tactic was utterly devastating, the nuclear weapon of 11th century warfare that had dominated European battlefields for generations. So, when the initial shock of the ambush wore off and tactical thinking resumed, the Knights of Bohemond's vanguard did exactly what decades of training and cultural conditioning had programmed them to do. They screamed their war cries, invoking Christ and various saints. They spurred their heavy destrier war horses, each costing more than a village, into thundering gallops. They lowered their lances with practiced precision, aiming for the chests of the nearest Turkish riders visible through the dust. They fully intended to shatter the encirclement through sheer concentrated brute force and knightly courage, but their lances struck nothing except empty air and settling dust. This is where the tactical genius of Kilij Arslan and the Seljuk Turkish military tradition becomes terrifyingly, brilliantly clear to understand they were not playing by European rules of warfare. As the Crusader heavy cavalry charged forward with earth-shaking momentum, the Turkish defensive line didn't brace for impact as European formations would. It simply evaporated like morning mist. The Turkish riders, mounted on nimble, lightning-fast steppe ponies bred for endurance and maneuverability rather than shock combat, wheeled their mounts around with practiced ease and galloped away from the charging knights. But they didn't just flee in panic or retreat to regroup. As they fled at full gallop, Turkish archers turned backwards in their saddles with movements perfected since childhood, drew their powerful composite bows back to their ears, and unleashed devastating volleys of arrows directly into the faces of pursuing Crusaders. This was the legendary Parthian shot, a tactic so ancient and so murderously effective that Roman legions had lost entire armies to it 1,000 years earlier on these same Anatolian plains. The Crusaders were chasing ghosts through choking dust. The heavy European warhorses, destriers bred for size and strength, already burdened by the tremendous weight of chainmail armor and exhausted from days of hard marching through mountainous terrain, simply could not close the gap with the lighter steppe ponies. It was like Formula One race cars trying to chase rally motorcycles across broken, rocky ground. Every time a frustrated knight urged his massive horse forward to maximum speed, the Turkish rider stayed tantalizingly just out of lance range, perhaps 20 yards distant, while peppering the knight's horse with arrow after arrow until the screaming beast finally collapsed in a twitching heap. The tactical result was a complete nightmare for European military thinking. The Crusader charge would build momentum. The horses would blow out their lungs from exertion. And the precise moment the exhausted knights stopped to turn back toward their defensive lines, the Turks would swarm inward again, closer this time. More confident, firing at point-blank range into the confused masses. It was like trying to fight an angry swarm of wasps with a sledgehammer the harder you swing. The more you exhaust yourself, and the more you get stung without ever connecting, you must understand the profound technological mismatch that made this tactic so devastatingly effective. The Turkish composite bow was an engineering masterpiece refined over centuries of steppe warfare. Constructed from wood, animal horn, and sinew laminated together in precise layers, it possessed draw weight powerful enough to launch arrows hundreds of yards with armor-piercing force. Yet it remained short enough, unlike European longbows, to be fired effectively from horseback at full gallop. It was functionally the machine gun of medieval warfare, in the hands of a trained Seljuk warrior who had been riding horses since age 3 and shooting bows since age 5. The composite bow could loose a new arrow approximately every 5 seconds. Multiply that individual capability by 25,000 riders surrounding the Crusader position. The mathematics becomes horrific, beyond comprehension, potentially 100,000 arrows filling the air every single minute. The sky literally darkened from the sheer volume of shafts. The Battle of Dorylaeum rapidly stopped being a battle in any conventional sense and devolved into a systematic massacre. The valley floor became littered with the bodies of dead and dying horses. The destriers that represented knights' wealth and identity screaming in agony from multiple arrow wounds. Knights stripped of their precious mounts were forced to fight on foot. Trudging through choking dust and heavy chainmail armor under the blazing July sun that turned metal into an oven, they moved slowly, blinded by sweat pouring into their eyes, presenting easy targets for circling archers. The hit-and-run ambush tactics perfected on the Asian steppes were systematically dismantling the pride of Christendom piece by piece. Bohemond of Taranto, watching from the center of the shrinking camp, realized the catastrophic reality within the first hour of combat. He saw his best knights, men he had trained with, fought beside for years, charge out with confidence only to be isolated, surrounded, and methodically cut down without ever striking an enemy. He understood with brutal clarity that continued offense was suicide. If they kept charging after the elusive Turkish riders, the Crusader force would be drawn apart into isolated groups and slaughtered piecemeal in the surrounding hills. The only thing keeping them alive at this point was the density of their formation, the concentrated mass of bodies and shields. So Bohemond made a decision that violated every aggressive instinct of a Norman warrior lord. He ordered the trumpet to sound retreat. He commanded his knights, men whose entire identity was built on offensive courage, to stop attacking and fall back. Stand fast. He ordered. The commands went down the line through shouting officers. Do not break formation under any circumstances. Fall back to the camp. He was effectively ceding the entire battlefield to the enemy, ordering his proud warriors to stand stationary and simply absorb punishment. It was a desperate gamble requiring superhuman discipline. Bohemond needed to compress his scattered forces into a tight defensive ball, using the concentrated mass of bodies and overlapping shields to create a fortress of flesh and iron. He hoped desperately that if they could just hold out, just survive the relentless reign of death, relief might eventually arrive from Godfrey's main army. But he had absolutely no way of knowing if the main force under Godfrey even knew they were under attack or could arrive in time. The Crusader perimeter began to shrink inward toward the Thimbres River, a shallow, marshy stream that offered their only protection against rear attack from the encirclement. The defensive circle became progressively tighter and more compressed. Knights, foot soldiers, women, priests, and terrified pilgrims were pressed together in a desperate, suffocating mass. The screams of arrow-wounded men mixed horrifically with the prayers of clergy. The dust kicked up by thousands of circling Turkish horses created a choking brown fog that reduced visibility to just a few yards. Inside that dust cloud, the temperature was rising unbearably. Precious water supplies were running dangerously low, and the arrows kept falling in endless volleys. Kile Arslan, watching from high ground with his commanders,